There we go. Okay, so for me, one of the biggest reasons why, as Danielle and I actually started talking about the summer and said, you know what, the text for Sunday mornings talk an awful lot about discipleship. And so I know we're going to spend time in discipleship. And discipleship, this book is kind of, it talks about what the foundations of discipleship are, right? When it refers to the marks of discipleship, it's kind of the things that are, these are things that tend to be, I would say, in most people who are kind of really growing and vibrant in their faith, these are some really common things that those folks have in common, right? And so I also like the idea of doing something that seems really foundational, right? Especially kind of post-COVID. It just seems like a good time to almost push restart, right, on some of those things and say, okay, let's go back to some of the basics. I think sometimes church can at least get really caught up in some of the, I don't know, the minutia or the things that aren't necessarily really foundational. And not that they can't be important, but for me, I'd like to kind of bring things back to some of the basics and say, let's do the basics well. Let's talk about the basics really well, and then move on from there. And so to me, this one is it's a foundational kind of a conversation to talk about what discipleship is and what it looks like when it's put into practice. So that's kind of where I'm at then as well. So what we're going to do, I want to make sure that there's also time that way. If you have questions about the book or about something that was there, or want to just make a statement about a particular section of it, please feel free at any point in time. But most of what we're going to do is just work our way through, like there's I think at least 4 different sections or maybe 5 of questions. Okay. And so we're going to kind of work our way down through the different questions that involve with each section of the book. So the first section, the first set of questions is on page 5. And this one, of course, is about the lead in is the story that he tells about meeting the guy on the airplane, right? Who's hungry for faith and trying to just ask questions and go deeper in that type of thing. And I don't know if it's just because of my profession or what it is, but I'll be honest, when I go on an airplane and talk to somebody that's a stranger, it goes one of 2 ways. Well, maybe 3. It's either you say hello, the other person says hello, and you don't speak the rest of the plane ride, right? You say hello and you feel like you have to make small talk the rest of the plane ride. Or I've also had the experience where a couple of times you get on the plane, you start to talk a little bit, and all of a sudden it's like you end up in the deepest of life conversations with this person that you met 20 minutes ago when you boarded the plane together, right? At least those are kind of the 3 different scenarios I think I've had when I've flown places. So that's kind of what this guy's talking about as he's writing and relating this story about a man who was really, really hungry for something, even if he didn't exactly know what it was. So the first question is, have you ever experienced that kind of spiritual hunger? If so, kind of when, and what did it feel like for you, and how was that met?
I wouldn't say it was a hunger, Pastor, but it was an experience that I remember from elementary school. This kid in our school was just a jerk. He was a bully. And I looked and I thought to myself, I wonder if he believes in God. I mean, I never asked him because we just didn't relate that way. But it was kind of interesting. My elementary education, I had a really nice Sunday school teacher. I just loved her, Mrs. DeVoe, still remember her. And at one time in our Sunday school class, I remember remarking, oh, holy cow. And we were talking about fish. And she said, well, actually, Joy, it's holy fish. I mean, it was just funny, but I could relate to her. But this kid was such a jerk. And I just thought, I wonder if he believes in God. What's going on with him? But I never had that conversation with him. It was just interesting. So when I saw this book, it brought back that memory of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't know if I'd call this a spiritual hunger, but I had a real I guess, faith crisis when my dad died. He was in and out
Okay.
of the hospital so much over a 6-month period and went through so much. And it was really hard for me to deal with why did he, if he was going to die, why didn't he just, I mean, why did he have to go through so much
Sure.
to get to that point? And I don't think it was any one thing. But it took a while to get
Well,
past that.
and sometimes that hunger, so like even in the second question, it's like, how has that longing, that hunger, sometimes the language they use might not be the way we would phrase it, and that's okay. We can ask them a different way too. But, how has that led to faith questions or discoveries? And that's one of those too, right? You go through those moments of the hunger is almost for an answer, right? And sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. Right. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, I've experienced some of that kind of thing too, whether it's, when we were younger and going through a miscarriage, right? And the notion of wait, this was right after we started seminary, and kind of, wait, we're planning on kind of changing our whole lives up in order to go do this. Why? Right? That was one of those big spiritual questions for us.
I mean, any death, I guess, can do that. But with my mom, she was 92. She had a good long life. Dad, that was like, I retired, and I don't know. It was just a whole different thing. And it was tough.
Sure. Other moments where there was kind of that spiritual hunger?
Now that Cindy talked about the death of her mother, it makes me think about the death of my mother, which was in 2003, a while back. Actually 20 years, I guess now. But every summer, our family would visit my folks in Iowa. So we'd see them twice a year, in summer and Christmas. And my mother, we were about to leave, but it was over the 4th of July, and my mother was sick in bed that day, and she didn't get up, and she said, Bonnie, come feel my stomach. And her stomach was very hard in one place. And I said, we'll have to go to the emergency room tomorrow, which we did. And they took her into surgery that night, opened her up and closed her because she was full of cancer of the colon. During that period of time, which took about 20 days in the hospital, I went back home to the East Coast, and my sister stayed. And then I had gone back to work, and my sister called me at work and said, the doctor said, you need to come out because she's not going to make it. And this was in the middle of the week. And my husband at the time said, well, we're going out Saturday. Why don't you just wait? And I had this feeling in my gut, I have to go. I have to go. So that day, we got plane tickets, my daughter and granddaughter, who was about a year old, actually 2 years old, and I flew back out to Iowa. My mother rallied for about 24 hours, and then she slipped and was non-communicative. And I remember Pastor Nancy coming in toward the end, and she was going to give her communion. That was such a spiritual moment for me. It was storming outside. There was lightning. It was black as pitch outside. And I said to Pastor Nancy, my mother can't swallow. How can you give her communion? And Pastor Nancy said, it's all right. It's all right. She'll get it. That is such a touching spiritual moment for me that I just, it's indelible in my mind. She died about 24 hours later, and she died that Saturday morning that we would have been traveling out to Iowa. So I thank God that I listened to my gut because I knew I had to go.
Those nudges, whether it's your gut, whether it's God saying, you might want to do something a little
Go.
different.
You need to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Other moments of hunger? I think Jeff's trying to unmute himself.
Yeah.
There he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I would say not as deep as the guy on the airplane in this story, because it feels like he was at a really, really low low.
Yeah.
And I would say that I've never been at a low low. I've never doubted my faith. God, the most simple things that they tell us in the Bible is that um, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your
Come on.
neighbor as yourself. Which of course made it so much simpler for me versus remembering 10 commandments. I won't ever remember 10 commandments, but remembering the two, if you will, makes it so much easy. So from that perspective, I always had faith. I always, believed in God and believed that Jesus did die on the cross for our sins, and that we'll be getting to heaven once we pass from here. So given that, there's been little that's ever really shook me, so to say. And I could really equate to what I read in here about the difference between joy and happiness,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I think I've always had joy. Given I didn't realize it until I read this. I think I've always had joy, but happiness is when you the birth of a child, or the Phillies win the World Series, or whatever. Those are the happiness things.
That happiness that only comes once or twice in a lifetime, right?
Right.
Well,
So-
so yeah, we're gonna get to joy, kind of that joy and happiness piece in a minute too, because I think that's a big one. It's a big differentiation, but I think it's an important one too. And so before we go there, I want to ask one other question. What does it mean to be? It talks about our culture being spiritually apathetic. In what ways do you think it is? My first question would be: what does it mean to be spiritually apathetic?
Not caring one way or the other.
Yeah, completely and utterly indifferent towards God or religion. I mean, at least that's what it seems like to me, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that our culture is spiritually apathetic?
I think our culture is missing the boat in everything. I've never seen so many people who cannot treat each other with respect or at least civility.
Right. Yeah.
Time after time after time. And, you have to say to yourself that question, did I ever go to church? Or,
Yeah.
You can't treat others the way so many people think they're entitled to do it.
Yeah, I think even when, if you think back in our nation's history, right, even if people weren't really, really active living out their Christianity, most of the time, I think there was still the notion of living by the morals of Christianity in one way or
like a
another.
common decency. I don't
Right,
know.
right. And that stuff I think fell in line with who we are as Christians. And I think we've seen those two things, that gap has completely and utterly widened. What is this is normal society, and this is what Christianity expects. I think those two things have just gotten further and further away from one another. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then looking at
Pastor, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I think also that, and I don't know who exactly did it, but they, took God out of school, and trying to be so darn politically correct that nowadays, you're almost lambasted if you say God or a specific reference to your religion, and
Yeah.
I think it's all driven by all the immigration in the last 50 years, although we were a country of immigrants created for freedom of religion. So,
Well, and we were talking about this a little bit this morning too, right? I mean, I know when I was growing up, nothing happened on Sunday mornings, right? Sunday mornings were kind of sacred. Even Wednesday nights at that point I would say they were just starting to be fair game for school districts and sports and things like that, but they were still a little more free than they are now, right? Wednesdays, there's no such thing as a Wednesday night church stuff, church night, that doesn't really exist anymore, culturally. Even Sunday mornings though, right? Most sports, I remember when we were in Lincoln, if you played hockey or if you played baseball and it was in season, your game started by 8 a.m. Sunday morning, right? That's just kind of the norm anymore because, and part of it is, we think about how did that come to be, right? And part of it is how did we as a society allow that to happen, right? Because the only way that would have ever stopped, or even now, like if an entire community desired for that to stop, that's the only way it would ever stop, right? We're not signing our kids up, or nobody's coming on Sunday mornings anymore. We're not coming to play soccer on Sunday mornings or baseball or whatever it is. But we're so far past that anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? It's just, that's kind of where we find ourselves, I think, unfortunately, as communities, and even as communities of churches, right? If all of the churches in Mechanicsburg at one point in time would have said, this is not okay, we need things to not at least take place until Sunday at 1:00, which is what it kind of was when I was growing up. But as a community, that never happened either. At least in most places. Maybe there are some where it did, not in any that I have lived in. Yeah. Okay. Were you gonna say something, Joy?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. It's all about me is the way society is right now. It's not about anybody else. It's all about me. It's very narcissistic. The selfies, all the pictures. It's like, it's just the Facebook. It's rather sad. No.
Our culture likes to use the word individualism, right, or individualistic, which I get to a certain point of individualism is okay. The problem is anymore, we've also moved to a point where it's individualism at the expense of others is okay, right? Where it's not a matter of what's best for the community or what's best for, we had an instance, confirmation camp this past week, right? We had an instance, the staff, as we planned some things, we made a decision that we thought was going to work out really well. By day 2, but actually by the first full day, we went out Sunday. By Monday at noontime, we realized this is not the best for the campers in these 2 particular tracks. It's not the best for their experience. So by Monday at about 2:00 in the afternoon, we actually switched some kids' cabins because we had the first 2 tracks, the first 2 age groups, they were mixed in cabins in 2 different ones. It wasn't working well because then they were wanting to be with their cabin and not with their people in their track. So it was kind of a distraction. And there was one of the advisors that came and said, you can't do that because I told my 2 girls they'd be in the same cabin and they were not in the same grade, right? And we got to the point of saying, okay, I understand this might not be popular with the 2 of them, but this is what's best for the community and this is what's best for their experience of camp. So we need to do it. Turned out the girls were fine. They could care less. But I think we have a harder time allowing a decision to be made for the good of a community rather than the good of an individual. Yeah, and it's individualism run rampant, I think, sometimes. But so on to page 7. And page 7 is the first question: how is joy different from happiness? Now, this morning it was interesting because I had at least 2 or 3 people in the room that said they had always had these 2 mixed, like flip-flopped from the way the author writes about them. For me, in a nutshell, the way I view what he's saying is, right, happiness is temporary. Happiness is that thing that can change from 1 hour to the next or 1 minute to the next, right? Happiness is based on your circumstances. Joy is based on the gift that we know in Jesus Christ. Right. The joy is, and we actually ended up, Joanna McIntyre, we're kind of on the same wavelength. I said, you know what? I kind of think about the song, right? The kids song. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart, right? Joy is something that resides in us. It's in here. And the outside world has no effect on whether or not we live as a person that has the joy that God has placed there, right? versus happiness, which many times is dependent on our circumstances in the moment. So I thoughts or other reactions to that notion of joy and happiness.
Yeah, more external. Happiness is more external and can change anytime. And
Although
joy, but I also believe too that you choose how you feel. Okay, you can choose to feel happy, you can choose to feel miserable. I mean, it's your choice what you want to do.
yeah,
But
well, and this Lois Whitmer this morning pointed out, it's on the next to last paragraph, the end of the next to last paragraph on page 6, and I really liked this sentence. You know, addiction to happiness leads us from real life into lesser substitutes, pretenders that promise joy but give only momentary happiness or distraction. And I thought, you know, that one's fantastic, because I think it kind of describes our world and our desire for instant gratification, right?
Yeah.
We're about happiness now instead of long-lasting joy. In my mind, at least, that's one way I think we can describe our culture. Have you ever known someone in your life that just exuded joy, right? You knew that they were a person of faith. You knew that joy that God placed there just kind of oozed out of them at all times, right? And it didn't matter, you know. I think in the congregation here, like I think of someone like an Arlene Steckbeck.
Yeah.
Right. She was one of those people, and I loved this about her. I did not get to know her very long, and I know a couple of you on the screen didn't ever get to know her, but she was a woman. She led the children's choir for decades.
Ever.
Decades. And when she was probably in her, how old was she when she died? Do you know, Cindy or Joy?
95.
90 something,
Yeah,
yeah.
she was in her 90s. But when I got here, she had a car accident shortly after I got here, and then kind of went downhill after that. But she was a person that you could watch her change the tone of a room just by walking into it. Like,
Yeah.
I used to love, in the first few months I was there, I used to love to watch her walk into the sanctuary, because she'd stop and talk to this person, and then this person, and then this person, and then this person. And next thing you knew, everybody in the sanctuary was smiling. Right. It's just, she had that kind of joyful presence. And actually even had that after she had the car accident, after she broke her ankle, when the healing wasn't going well, she still had that joyful presence. That's, to me, that's the kind of attitude and personality that I think of when I think of that kind of person.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know how well you know Josie Clay. I think that's another person that can bring just outward joy as she talks and discusses people.
I could see that. I could see that.
Now, but now her memory is really fading.
Yes.
Of course, but when she was in her prime,
okay,
in my opinion, yes.
Are there other people in your life that you would lift up?
You mean not of my church family?
Yeah, even not in church family, just
my mother is
Okay.
very joyful.
Okay.
I feel. Would you say?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not so much as Arlene, where she just goes into a room. It's a different type of joy.
Yeah. Well, not all personalities are the same. Joy comes out in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I think my mother-in-law, who's been gone for a while, but she was piano playing was her thing. She never took lessons, but she could hear something and play it. And she was 98, I think, when she died.
Okay.
And about 90-ish, she said to us one time, she was going to a senior daycare, and she said, I don't really know why I keep doing this, but those old people enjoy my piano playing. I don't think to feel that way at 90. It was just like, wow.
That's like my grandfather-in-law, when he was in the nursing home at 93 and 94, would say, oh, I'm going down to play bingo with the old people today.
Yeah.
I was like, you realize you're one of the oldest ones there, right? But okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Any others? So one of the other questions in that section, right? It says, does it make sense that joy is only possible when we lose ourselves, live beyond our wills and desires? It's kind of a wordy question, but I think what they're trying to say is, does it make sense that we experience more joy when we think about ourselves less? I think that's what they're trying to say. Does that make sense?
And think about others more.
Yeah. Okay. What causes you to experience joy? Like what brings, I mean, we have that joy in us, we have the gift of the good news, but what kind of brings that joy to the surface for you? What types of things?
Grandchildren.
Grandchildren. That was a big one this morning too. Kids and grandkids.
Yeah. And Sunday school. I mean, I
Just gonna say that, George.
I do, yeah,
I'm
Brian.
surprised you didn't say that.
We have so much fun with the kids in Sunday school. It's just they're coming to God, young children, which is what they would like to do. I mean, they're fun. It's just good.
I'm not surprised the two of you would say that one too. Yeah. That's fun. That's good. What else? Any other kind of things that just always seem to bring that joy out in you?
I think Second Saturday does too. Just seeing those people come and socialize and have fun. They just love it there. It's a very welcoming event. It's good.
Yeah, I'm one of those, I love to people watch, right?
Oh, me
And
too.
so one of the things that I take great joy in is in a faith setting, watching that group. Like I'm the same way. Like when you just sometimes step back and you watch the room at Second Saturday and realize everybody has what they need at the moment, right? Like that's a joyful kind of feeling. And I even at confirmation camp, I kind of feel that way once in a while, especially when I'm leading worship. And I presided at the opening service, and then I actually got to preach the closing service at confirmation camp this year. And there were a couple times where I just, even in the midst of singing, which I love to do, I stood back and just took it in for 20 or 30 seconds. And watching a group, especially for a group of kids or teenagers that sometimes you can't get them excited about all that much, right? But they're excited about being together and singing and in worship and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a joyful moment. Because for me, I also love it when you get a group of people together that are really interested in no agendas, right? No agendas, just conversation about faith. To me, that's just always joyful. I love those moments in those conversations.
Cool.
Any others?
I have to say, Special Olympics is one of my favorite things during the school year, and it's mostly because we get to see kids beyond what we see them as from kindergarten to 5th grade, and you get to see these kids as teenagers, and they don't always remember. Oftentimes they don't remember who you are, but you get to see the progress that has just come in baby steps over the years. And
seeing the growth, I mean, because it's not something we often get to see, is the growth that comes from the seeds that we've helped to plant 5, 10, however many years ago.
Exactly. And I mean, I would imagine any teacher that has ever been in a classroom, experiences joy when they see one of their students down the road,
right?
And see how they've progressed.
Yeah, I would think so too. I
think for me, it's when you see the young folks go through the confirmation and profess their faith. And then you see them living it out as they get older, and they take it with them wherever they go. At that young age that gives me a lot of joy that they come to it at a younger age.
Yeah.
And they take it with them. I mean, I grew up in the church, Lutheran church, and, you learn to believe and you do through confirmation. But then, when you're senior in high school, early 20s, I kind of got away from it. But I knew that I needed it. and came back to it. And but to see kids get it at a young age is what brings me joy.
Well, that's
Even though it's not my kid,
right.
to see other ones come through.
And I think even part of what you were talking about there too, Karen, is that notion of, right. I mean, I was one of those. I went to college, and when I came home, I went to worship, but I didn't go to worship when I was in college. That was, and then me, to be honest, then I got out of college, and once I got out of college, I worked for a little while, but I was heading to seminary, so church was a lot of what I did, right? But I still, even in those moments when I didn't do church as much, like there was this, whether it's a longing or just a feeling of something was missing, right? That sometimes is there. I still feel that way. Like if we're on vacation and we choose not to go to church on a Sunday morning, I notice it. It just feels, wait, I'm missing. Oh, that's right. I didn't do church this morning.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes, I experienced it with my best friend's son. I saw him struggle in college. He felt like he didn't have any friends. He didn't have a girlfriend, didn't have any friends to hang around with, got in trouble with drinking. But after he graduated and got a teaching job, he moved away for a while, was living in Chickateague. But he found somebody that brought him to faith.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him not only grow personally, but with her as well. I mean, they're married now. It's been almost a year. But to see them, I don't see them often, but when I see them, I can see that how far he's come.
Sure.
He's not my kid, but it gives me joy to see a young person, because you don't see that in younger people. It's all about, what do I have, and how much money do I make, and how big's my car, and how fancy is my house. They're not like that. But to see them take this little journey, and I get little bits and pieces of it, brought me a lot of great joy, because I saw him when he struggled back when he was 19, 20 years old, and to see him turn it around 10 years later and have this great faith in God, it's just amazing.
Yep. Yeah, those kind of turnarounds are absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Pastor?
Yeah, Jeff.
So the question, does it make sense that joy is only possible when we lose ourselves, etc.? I kind of liken that to, I don't know that it's only possible, but I think it's much, much easier when you kind of like the old statement, what would Jesus do? But kind of turn that around a little bit, and would Jesus be proud of what I did?
Okay.
And I think if you kind of equate it to that, that if he'd be proud of you for what you did, of course the Father would be also, and you'd have that tighter bond, which I think would then make the increased joy.
Well, and part of that question also said to me is, what do we have to lose in order to, I don't know, what do we have to lose in order to be more joyful? Right? What do we have to lose in ourselves, in our world, in order to experience the joy that God wants us to feel more often? What do you think?
I don't know that. Well, it is. I mean, I do believe that you have to give more time of yourself in order to be able to helping other people, which is what God really wants us to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. So with that, I think you got to give up something. I don't think you have to give up everything.
No, I agree. You
don't sell your house and go live, with the homeless while you're trying to help the homeless.
Well, and for me, like, so part of what I'm thinking is part of what you said too, Jeff. Like, I think sometimes one of the things we need to lose is we have to lose our own ego. Right? We have to set our ego aside at times. There are moments where, yeah, we've got to set time aside. We've got to set aside, I forget who it was. Was it you, Sally, this morning, that said about sometimes we have to set aside our notion of we're too busy or there's not enough hours in the day. Yeah. Right? Sometimes we have to set aside, I don't think it's often where we have to set aside things like our own safety or those kinds of things. Not that can't happen in order to be faithful, but I think more often than not, it's the smaller things, like we need to be more selfless. We need to lose some of the ego and the ability or the desire to always be right. Those kinds of things I think are more likely what we need to let go of in order to be more joyful.
And I think that's hard sometimes today because it's the trophy generation. In order to, you got to give the kids a party, you got to give them a medal for participating, and everything seems to be all about the kid. And it's not that they play the sport because they just want to play. We don't have choose up anymore. Everything is scheduled and they have to get a trophy, and that I think parents have kind of brought this on themselves. It's like the kid has to earn all these things, and I think that they lose a little bit when they do that. They're not doing it for the fun of playing. They want to get a trophy, they want to get a prize, they want to get ice cream, and I think we're losing that just for the joyfulness of play. Just have fun, participate, play. You don't have to get anything for it. So I think we're losing our way that way.
Okay.
I was always a huge fan in the classroom, and I used all his quotes and books of John Wooden. And he would have been the person, you walk into the room, the skinny little guy, old man, but all these phenomenal athletes would get down, and whatever he said was Bible. He'd kick you out of the practice if your shoelaces weren't tied properly. I mean, he did that to Bill Walton. But I always told our kids the famous, basically the gist of his quote was a measure of one's character is what you do when nobody else is looking.
Right.
Sure.
Yep.
But I used those and that was, you always did it for the team, not for you.
Right.
Type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and there's language today where they talk about like, you fill your cup, right? And which is an important concept. I think we've got to do things that help to fill our cups and keep us there. But the notion of, I remember we were having this conversation at confirmation camp with one of the groups, and they were talking about what is it that fills your cup? How do you fill other people's cup? Like that kind of cycle. And we all too often think that the only way we can fill our cup is by taking it from someone else's, right? But I'll be honest, for me, like one of the ways that my cup gets filled up is by watching other people have their cup filled, right? So it's not the notion of it can only be one thing at one time, that we can actually serve the good of a community or another person, and it's okay that it feels good for us, right? That's an okay thing. It's a byproduct of being selfless and serving and thinking about others, but it's a good one. Yeah. All right. Well, then I'll tell you what, let's look at the questions. We're going to turn over to page 9 for some of those reflection questions. Now they start to bring in a little bit of the language of kind of the marks as we get to starting to talk about the marks of discipleship, right? It's just the intro. So we haven't even named all of the marks of discipleship yet. But the question is, how is your present life bearing marks of a life that is worthwhile and fulfilled? And I think what they're kind of saying is, what are the benchmarks? What are the visible things in your life that remind you that your life is worthwhile? To me, this one was a little bit of a harder question, but I want to throw it out there just to see what you think.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind, and the easy one, is our kids.
Okay.
I agree.
I know with us, Tammy and I have gone to church most of our life, and we brought up our kids in a Lutheran church and taught them the books of the Bible and all the different things you're supposed to do. And I would say our kids' faith is just as strong, if not stronger, than ours. And our son, he just got his doctorate in music, and his one master was in sacred music, and his wife is a Lutheran pastor. And then our daughter, she's extremely strong in faith as well. She does social work, and her husband his faith is extremely strong. And so, and our kids are much smarter than what we were if you compare it to the SATs, because John scored like a 1460 or something, and Katie's was a 1210 or something like that. And I just hit 1,000, so, I'm down low, and Tammy was probably even lower. So, but it's just the wisdom, not the wisdom. Wisdom is what you get when you get older. So we're wiser than them, but they're smarter than us, type of thing. But I think just watching them grow, and then what they do with their friends, their environment, their kids. Their daughter is going to have our first grandchild in October, and seeing how she prepares and what all she does and the actions that she takes as a new mom. I think those are all the kinds of things that we say, well, we were significant in teaching her that, or teaching John music or whatever. And I think it's a matter of seeing that and knowing that we're here for a purpose. And maybe that is our primary purpose, was for those two. Yeah.
That's good. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Other kind of marks? And I know this morning, even as we kind of went around, a lot of them ended up centering around kind of kids, grandkids, and some of that kind of stuff too. And I don't know if anybody has any other different kind of thoughts.
Well, the word, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
I don't know who else was jumping in.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The word marks, that doesn't sit well with me.
Okay.
We were talking about Arlene Steckback, right? So let's put Arlene Steckback's name in here. How is Arlene Steckback's life bearing the marks of a life that is worthwhile fulfilled?
When they say marks, I think what they really are just saying, what's the visible sign, right?
Exactly.
What's the outward sign?
So when we would see Arlene Steckback, and we knew nothing about what kids she had, nothing, but yet she, it was joyful.
Yeah.
It was
Well, and so for
about
me,
her.
yeah. So for me, one of the marks of discipleship that I would talk about with her is relationships, because the woman was masterful at them. Like, she had a relationship with everybody and anybody, right? That would be one of the marks, you could say. I think they only use that language, and I think they could ask it in a different way. I think they use that language because they want it to be a precursor to the start of the conversation that starts next week, when we actually talk about what they are referring to as the marks of discipleship. And they're really more of what are the, I don't know, building blocks, what are those external, I don't know, markers, if you will. But that's, some of their questions as they ask them are a little bit cumbersome in the wording.
I mean, when I read that question, I went, what marks in my life? I don't look at my life and say, where am I at? What step am I on?
Okay, so
about legacy. What
okay,
legacy?
so we're gonna have a
Hey,
conversation.
Brian, you're wonderful, wonderful with the kids. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better person to team with as far as working with kids. Where's Mr. Keister? Where's Mr. Keister? I mean,
Well, thank you.
well, it's true. I mean, really, you really are a great person with kids, and that's just something that you have. It's a gift, but it's wonderful.
Well, and so some of those are also marks that, to be honest, they might not always be external. Like, you might not think of them, right? We could probably sit here and I bet name a few things for you, Brian, if you'd like us to do that, which I'm sure you don't. But the reason I say that is, I think one of the marks of discipleship and a life that is worthwhile and feels fulfilled is because you live your life, not only, I think you live it selflessly and you live it humbly, right? With humility. Those are marks. They might not be like big flashy kind of marks, but they're marks that people resonate with when they see them and when they know you, right? So it's kind of in some ways, it's the what is the part of your character and the part of your personality in which God's light shines through the most, Maybe that's a different way to even think about it and put it. And I know sometimes, like, especially for people who are super humble, that's a hard concept, right? To say,
It
well,
is
this
your
is
gifts and your talents,
right.
your gifts and talents. I mean, that's important. And everybody right here has a gift. They have
Yep.
talents, and they share it in different ways.
As Lutherans, we just don't like to brag about them most of the time. So, yeah. Okay. Well, so then go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it could be the things that others see in each of us that makes them think, what is it that they have? You know,
Mhm.
they have something that I would like to have too.
I think you're absolutely right. Or they look at them and they say, I can tell they are a person of faith because of this, right? That's that visible, almost a mark, if you will, that people can see and tell.
Not
I
that
wanted-
Laura.
What's that, Bonnie?
I'd like to share an experience too. I don't know about life that is worthwhile, but one that is fulfilled. And in another lifetime, when I was working in public health, I worked in mental health for about 12 years. And this is a long time ago, in this late 70s and 80s. And we did community mental health. I did mobile treatment, which meant that we went out to see people in their homes or meet them in Roy Rogers or wherever the fast food was and have a cup of coffee and make sure they were taking their medication, because the purpose was to keep chronically mentally ill out of the hospital at that time. So that's like, what, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Oh my. And I never really knew if I made a difference. And I was very naive and just kind of flew by the seat of my pants. Anyway, this one instance, I got to know a family very well because their son was chronically mentally ill with schizophrenia. And he lived by himself in his own apartment. His parents called me and said, Craig's not answering our calls and we're very concerned about him. Would you go visit him? Which I did. And he wouldn't answer me either. And then I took another nurse with me, and both of us went. And at that time, they had such things as emergency petitions, which you could take through the court and then have the police come with you, which I did. How naive I was is, in all of the cop shows, the cops stand on either side of the door. Well, I stood right in front of the door. So, but I had some kind of trust, and he did open the door for us. And he had been off his meds a long time. He had a belief that aliens were going to come after him, and he had tinfoiled everything from the TV antennas to the oven. So he was taken in for evaluation and treatment. Anyway, I got to know his family very well. His father was a Methodist minister and his mother was a nurse. You never know if you make a difference, I'm Facebook with his mother, and she said, well, Craig's going to be 60 years old. We're asking everybody to send a card shower. So I sent him a card on his 60th birthday.
Yep.
And I said, now, Craig, I don't know if you remember me or not, but I gave my name and I knew you from mental health, and I know your mother and dad. This happened about the time that Leanne had died. And
Okay.
I came home from her service, which was overwhelming. So I was emotional anyway. And in the mail, I was so overwhelmed. This guy sent me all of the books he was an artist all these years,
Oh,
graphic artist. And he sent me this book. He had it self-published. It's a graphic art on
like graphic
Cosmic
novel.
Crusader. Cosmic Crusader. And then he sent me another bound book that had all the pictures that he had done over the years. I was so blown away.
Yeah.
And you know, in the nursing or medical field or the teaching field, you never know. In your field too, Pastor, you never know how you touch people. And I was so blessed to have that sent to me. I just had no words for it.
Yep.
That he even remembered me at such a critical time in his life.
That's a wonderful
Anyway.
story, Bonnie. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic story. That's a fantastic story. Yeah.
I know teachers have that happen too,
Yes.
because I have
Yeah.
teachers in my family.
So one of the questions then down below that one, right? It talks about, they talk about no cost decisions in life, that there are really no cost-free decisions. What's your reaction to that?
I think I agree, but I'm not sure that I can explain why I feel that way.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like there is a cost in things, not monetary, and I don't think
No,
that's
and
what
that's
it means
and
at all.
I don't think they're
But there-
referring to monetary. It's more
No,
of
I
a
don't
personal
either,
cost.
but I think there's a cost when you choose one thing over another. You're giving something up to do something else.
Okay.
I mean, that's really general, but I would agree with that.
Others, what do you think? Yeah, Jeff.
So using the pastor and the guy in the beginning of this section, that they were on a plane trip together. There, I think it could be a cost-free decision, because the pastor could sit there and not do anything, talk to him, or he could talk to him and the guy was really looking for faith. Maybe the guy was going to commit suicide, but the pastor was able to, say the right things and make the guy rethink life and not go home and commit suicide. I mean, committing suicide wasn't part of this book, but I'm just saying what could happen, and it's at no cost to the pastor. He didn't take any extra time out of his travels to do it. Maybe he's going to work on his sermon or something for Sunday on the trip, but he was there just talking about what he loves best.
Yeah, the
And
only
I think-
cost to him in that scenario really was, the only cost was really time, which I
Time.
suppose you could say is maybe still a little bit of a cost.
Time,
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, as I was thinking about it too, I think there are cost-free decisions. Do I think it costs anything whether I have Cheerios or a Pop-Tart for breakfast, in the morning? I'm not sure that
No.
that's really a costing kind of a decision. I do think sometimes that, especially the big decisions in life,
The big ones is
tends to have some sort of cost to them, right? Am
yeah.
I going to take this job that pays more money but isn't what I love to do, or am I going to do what I love to do and know that I'm going to maybe have to scrounge a little bit to pay the bills and get by? Am I going, there are some of those kinds of things that become a little bit more of a cost.
Yeah, I was thinking the big stuff. I wasn't thinking breakfast food, I have to say.
Right.
Yes, Cindy, I was thinking more along the lines of your faith and church. What are you going to do? How are you going to choose to spend your time?
Mhm.
I was thinking more along, because as you talked before about these young people and soccer games on Sunday, and it just drives me crazy. It's like, I don't want to go to a soccer game on a Sunday. I want to make sure that people go, and that's a cost decision. Okay, kids are involved in soccer. Our grandchildren are very involved in that, and they choose soccer over church, and that's their choice. But I don't want them to make that choice for me. So yeah, it's,
Now the hard part
tough.
about that is too, though. So let's think about the family that has a 12-year-old kid who plays soccer. He's a starter on the soccer team, right? The travel
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, the cost is you can't go play on Sunday mornings. If your game is Sunday afternoon or Saturdays, you can play. You can't play on Sunday mornings. The cost of that is chances are he will no longer be a
You're
starter.
off. You're off. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So
I
those
know.
kinds of, those are the kinds of things that sometimes come with a cost, whether we like it or not. Yeah.
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 Well, is there some way that we can think about different times of worship then? Like Catholic churches have Saturday
Saturday nights and
evenings.
stuff. Yeah. I mean, there are possibilities.
And
What I
there
would
are people
say
who
is,
do shift work who
Yeah.
can't come Sunday mornings.
I mean,
Who
when I
could
was
maybe come Saturday evenings.
before I was in
I hate
seminary,
to
I
say
was
that to
a
you, but
geriatric nursing assistant, and I worked every other weekend. And so I worked days. So we would go Saturday nights to St. James and Gettysburg, because they were the only place around that had a Saturday night service.
I think St. John's in Sharmanstown has
Yeah.
a Saturday evening.
Yeah, there's a couple around. They do have a Saturday.
there
like
are
a
now.
5:30 or 6 o'clock or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know someone goes there.
So I want, if you're willing to bear with me just a few more minutes, I've got two more questions I want to ask that are on page 13. It's the last little section.
I got a
Um,
light.
Gonna get a light.
Yeah.
We can still see you.
Uh,
So the big one that I want to, it's the first two that I actually really want to ask. And it's, what does it mean to you that the call of God is it's a call to life, a call to live, and not a call to a job? What does that mean?
Hey, Pastor,
Yeah, Jeff.
I go to a Saturday morning men's breakfast in New Cumberland, and we
Okay.
kind of covered this topic a few weeks ago. And that is like when somebody says, "Well, what do you do?" Okay, well, I'm a salesman, I'm a computer person, I'm a cook or whatever.
Yep.
But
Yep.
really, the answer shouldn't be what our job per se is. It really should be more like, well, I trust and believe in God, and I try to spread that wherever I go. Now, for
Right.
a profession, I'm a cook, a barber, or whatever, and get into what they really were asking. But I believe that what God would want us to say is that we are faith-based, whatever that answer may be, and go from there.
Yeah. I mean, we are not our job, right? First and foremost, we are baptized children of God.
yeah, you find that out when you're retired. You are not your job.
Okay. I got to give it a couple more years yet. But so and this is where I think those two questions that I want to ask, the first two on page 13, kind of go together, because what defines you, right? You meet somebody, let's go back to the airplane. You meet somebody on an airplane. What's the first thing you do? Oh, what's your name? Usually the first question right after that is,
what do you do?
What do you do? Yeah.
What do you do? Where do you live? It's all about what defines you, and what defines us. Unfortunately, where we tend to go is those things that define us on a pretty superficial external level, defined by where we live. We're defined by how old we are, or we're defined by gender, or we're defined by our occupation, right? That those are some of the ways in which we define ourselves. When I look at that question, the second part of that second question, what, or I would even say, who would you like to define you? Right? And in my mind, the thing or the person that I want to define me is God. Because God doesn't define me as a pastor. God doesn't define me as a brother. God doesn't define me as someone who's screwed up royally in a lot of different ways. God defines me, maybe as a sinful but forgiven and redeemed and beloved child of God, right? So when I think about how would I like to be defined, I would like to be defined by God. I don't want to be defined by the world. I don't even want to be defined by myself. Like somebody earlier today said, well, I want to be defined by my words and actions. And I said, oh, good Lord, I don't want that. Right? Because if I'm defined by every word that I've said or every action that I've taken,
Only the
I
good
don't,
ones.
only the good ones, right? But I don't want to be defined by that. I want to be defined by the God who loves me enough to overlook all of that, and love me anyway, right? That's to me, that's a really important part. And I think that's even that notion of what you were talking about with the first question, Jeff. You know, we are called to a life, which in my mind is we're called to a life in Christ. We're called to a lifestyle, which, yes, that includes having an occupation. It includes having hobbies. It includes having family. And in my mind, at least, when we are called to that life and living in a lifestyle of discipleship, that call to life comes through in everything we say and do, right? It comes through in our occupation. It comes through in how we raise our family. It comes through in our relationships. It comes through even in how we choose to disagree with other people. Yeah. Those first two questions on this one, I think, are just really, really good questions. We might pick up just a little bit next time and touch on the last question or two. But I want to honor your time. I don't want to go too far over. Are there any other final thoughts or final questions you want to throw out there from the introduction?
I have one.
Yeah, Brian.
And then I thought of you sitting on the airplane, okay,
Okay.
talking with this guy. And this guy says, lost another one.
Yeah.
Okay. When the guy turns towards the window and says, lost another one, I could not see my pastor Aaron saying that to himself.
So here's the thing about that kind of thing sometimes. So there is what I refer to as pastoral guilt. And it's a very, very common thing in my life, right? And I think we all do this. This isn't just pastors, right? We tend to focus on the ways that we've failed instead of focusing on the ways that we've made a difference or succeeded, in part because sometimes we don't know it, right? So I have had those moments where I've gotten done with something and said, ah, crap, didn't do that one well, right? And I think that's kind of what he's talking about too. Lost another one, like conversation's over. What I tried to do made no difference. I think most pastors I know probably have had that feeling from time to time. Shoot, okay, well, I bombed that sermon. That's not going to make a difference in anybody's life. Or I've had moments where somebody was had somebody that I really needed to have checked on to do pastoral care and talk with them, and completely fell off my radar, right? And that was one of those moments where it was like, shoot, not quite lost another one, but it was, I messed that one up royally, and there's really no choice but to go to the person and try to figure out how to best fix it and apologize and do all of that kind of stuff. So I don't know that I've ever said, ooh, lost another one, but I understand the feeling of guilt and sometimes focusing too much on, as pastors, right? We still have egos, and we still sometimes are kind of like, okay, this is, if I do this right, then this will succeed, this will happen. And sometimes I think God laughs at us and says, you idiot, it's not you. It's not you, it's me. Just trust me, I got this. You just get out of the way. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's the best I can respond to that, Brian. It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good thing.
The seed.
What's that?
It doesn't hurt to plant the seed.
No. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things. So I worked an awful lot with middle school and high school youth when I was in Lincoln. And to go back and do a wedding or two, which I've done recently, to see the ways in which they are now living as married people, and a bunch of them have kids. Most of them, I would say, are still really, really active in church. As kids in their late 20s and even into their 30s now, they are really active in church. Like, that's the kind of thing you look back on and talk about a sense of joy, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty wonderful to watch, but those are seeds you never know when you're trying to plant them. All you can do is plant and let God provide the growth, right? That's Paul. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to wrap us up with a word of prayer. And then we'll let you go for the night, and we'll see you next week. And if you're also welcome to join us however you like, whether it is in person, online, whatever you're able to do. We are going to record so that if you miss a week, you can always catch up that way and just at least hear the conversation that happened. So, but the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Also with you.
Lord of life and love, as we gather in the comfort of our own homes tonight, but with this community of faith, we give you thanks for the gift of your word, for the gift of faith, for the gift of joy that you place into our lives. Help us to experience the joy that you give us in profound ways. Help us to find ways to live our life in you, and not to focus so much on our failings and our shortcomings, but the ways in which you work through us. Help us to know that you are always in our presence and always moving inside us until we are together again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.